So now we're going to take a serious moment here to discuss the life and times of the playwright, activist, critic, all-around fascinating fellow Eric Bentley. And the big joke, if you can call it a joke, is when I was in graduate school. Eric Bentley came and spoke to us. And it was a big thing. I wrote an article about it in Boles blogs. This is the article, Thinking About Eric Bentley, January 12, 2010. And we was celebrating his 93rd birthday. And he wrote many books, super genius in everything. And very strict rules, because at 93, he could not see, he could not hear. We could not ask him spoken questions. We could not hear well. This is the ground rules when he came to speak to us at Columbia University. All questions had to be neatly printed on index cards or they would not be considered. We could not ask follow-up questions because Eric also had an eye problem, which you could not see when the questions were coming and where they were coming from his audience. Gordon says of this photograph, wow, the top of his cane looked a lot like him. Yikes, very interesting. But a very interesting, very important person in the history of what we'll call the modern drama. And he was very strict and very brutal. And I remember that day at Columbia. We were there talking about his very famous book, Thinking About the Playwright. And he was expecting us as Columbia University graduate students in theater to know everything that he knew throughout his life, that we read all of his books, that we read all of the plays that he was talking about so we could have a conversation with him on his level about the history of theater and modern theater. And many didn't even know who Eric Bentley was, even though Howard Stein tried to tell us. Many had never read a word he had written. And many didn't know any of the plays he was talking about. Now, there were a few of us who did our research and read his book and were able to ask somewhat convincing questions, but you could tell he was very irritated with us. A room full of dummies was sort of his attitude. Very unkind and very irritated. And people did not like they had to write on an index card to get him to answer them, even though he was severely disabled. And when you would ask him a question, which was like a follow-up, he would get very, very angry. And Howard would have to step in and say, you cannot ask Eric follow-up questions because he can't see you and he can't hear you. He's basically legally deaf and blind. 93 years old. So the terrible joke thing was, for years after we all graduated from Columbia University, was Eric Bentley. And it was, hey, is he dead yet? Now, some appeared to be anxiously eager to say that Eric Bentley was dead. Gordon says, hey, pass me an index card. I want you a follow-up on it. I agree. That's what we should have done. That system should have been in place. And it would have been fine because he was blind. He would read the index card like this and then respond to it. And the answer was always, for years, no, he's not dead yet. Eric Bentley's still alive. What? Eric Bentley's still alive? He was 93 years old. How could he still be alive? He's such a hateful, mean person, some people said. Not me. I thought he was interesting. I loved Eric Bentley. I loved that I got to meet him, and I got to shake his hand, and I got to say I know Eric Bentley. It was important to me. And then time and tide changes. Life takes over. You lose connections. People stop making bad jokes because their life has become a bad joke. I'm not speaking about myself. And Eric Bentley dies, and you don't really hear about it. So here is the New York Times article. Eric Bentley, critic who preferred Brecht to Broadway, dies at 103 years old. Now imagine how long, 20 years of his life he probably suffered by being deaf and blind. And his whole life was reading, writing, and watching drama. The live stage. He believed that a play was recognized by being produced and put on the stage, not just by being read. And so for the last 20 years of his life, his most beautiful form of affection and love was taken away from him. Because he was just immortal, after all. And he was the champion of modern drama. Bertolt Brecht especially. He was a big fan of Brecht. And what a life he's had. You just read his obituary from 2020. Eric Bentley in 1976. He taught, he wrote plays, he was an influential theater critic, as well as a scholar, author, and playwright, who was an early champion of modern European drama and unsparing antagonist of Broadway. Hallelujah. Died on Wednesday at his home in Manhattan. He was 103 years old. And I believe his apartment was a 12-room apartment. If you can believe that. Now, you can only get those if you're 103 years old and you got your apartment in 1930. His son, Philip, confirmed his death. There he is teaching a classroom full of students. He also taught at Columbia University and became engaged in leftist campus police during the volatile 60s and was surprised everyone when he quit. He quit Columbia University. In part, he said, to experience life as a gay man. He had been previously married twice. And people didn't understand it, and they asked him, well, okay, so you're a gay man in 1960. Why do you have to quit your tenured job at Columbia University? And he explained, he said, because my colleagues were very conservative, and they wouldn't have understood me, and they would have exiled me. Gordon asks, what finally did him in, this is a joke, was finding out that Spider-Man, Turn of the Dark, existed at one point in history. Oh, boy. That's a good point. Mr. Bentley's 1946 essay collection, The Playwright as Thinker, did for modern drama what Edmund Wilson's Axel's Castle done for modern poetry. It established a map of territory previously obscured by opinion and rumor. So he has put his imprint on American thinking and American drama and dramaturgy, and there is no one like him now. John Simon, who used to review for, New York Magazine, tried to have the same bite as Eric Bentley, but not the same intellect. And here he is. He even cut his hair like Bertolt Brecht because he was so enamored by him. That was his biggest supporter. Here he is in his old age, in his apartment, his beautiful apartment. So obviously, he made enough money and lived a long enough life that he was able to survive to be 103. Gordon asks, am I misremembering, or did he do his New York Times review on the radio? I swear I remember hearing play reviews on the radio with a sign-off, I'm Eric Bentley for the New York Times. Well, that's interesting. I don't know. Let's see if we can do a search on this. Well, it doesn't say anything in the New York Times article about him being on the radio. But it certainly could be. And here's a bit from The Playwright as Thinker. And this is how he starts it. He wrote it in 1945. It was a big hit. And Harold Clurman, who was a big director at the time, hated it because Eric took him on without mentioning him as being a plague on the theater. Eric had hurt his feelings, and Eric said, I didn't know it was possible that he had feelings. And then he rewrote in 1955, 10 years later, a new foreword to the book. He called a foreword to a foreword, which is fascinating in itself, and added a whole bunch of notes about how things had changed from what he originally wrote in 1945. But he wanted to leave the original text as it was. He didn't want to modify it or update it in any way because it would change what he had thought in 1945. But this is how the book in 45 begins. And I want to ask you, if you go to the theater, has anything changed since 1945? The box office never lies. Lee Shubert, yes, of the Shubert brothers, the Shubert organization, the Shubert Theater in New York City. The box office never lies. And then George G. Nathan says to that, dramatic criticism is, or should be, concerned solely with dramatic art, even at the expense of bankrupting every theater in the country. And there you have it. Then as now, are plays produced to make money and to entertain, or are plays produced to be cathartic? To give people a place to go and think and ponder their lives in the world. And today, right now, the sense is Broadway's it. We go to the theater to release. We want to laugh and have fun and be funny. Nobody wants a serious play. Nobody cares about Shakespeare anymore. Ibsen who? Bertolt Brecht what? A three-penny opera, huh? Give me more Kinky Boots. And it's a terrible, terrible sign of what it means to be on Broadway and on the legitimate, as they say, stage. Off-Broadway is off-Broadway. Regional theater sucks up to Broadway. Everybody wants a hit. Everybody wants to sell a ticket. Nobody wants to enlighten a mind anymore. And part of that is economics. If you're creating a play, you are not paid until that play is produced, and you get paid when the show is running. You are writing for yourself, and no one pays you up front. And if they do, you're going to be tortured by them. They want updates. They want to say in what's being said. And the other thing is time. The average time from the beginning of an idea for a Broadway play and actually it appearing on Broadway is 7 years. Now, who can afford to work on something for free without remuneration for 7 years? And then maybe it closes after one night. Well, the people who can do that are people who are established and rich and who've had past successes. So let's look at Will Rogers' Follies, just as an example. You have Comden Green, Betty and Adolph, Cy Coleman, Tommy Tune, Peter Stone. All superstars in their own right. Academy Award winners, Tony winners, Oscar winners. 7 years. Let's write a show about Will Rogers. And you write the show and you get together and then it disassembles and you put it together and schedules don't match. Finally, you get on Broadway, open, done. Hey, let's do it again. I'll see you in 7 years. It's unsustainable, and it's unfortunate. So in 1945, this is what Eric Bentley said in his foreword to the argument of his book that set the world on fire. People were very insulted. Eric Bentley said, people talk more about my foreword than they did about what I said about all these other plays. And that's because, Eric, nobody reads those plays. They can understand your foreword. This book is about the playwright. And before this, the playwright was secondary. The director was first, then the actors, then the design. Oh, that person who wrote the play. And because of this book, this turnaround, the playwright became elevated and became more important in the world of the modern stage. Eric Bentley wrote, this book is about the playwright, the forgotten man of the modern stage. Forgotten. Gordon says some people say that plays like Hadestown are a promising sign of good plays to come. That could be. Eric Bentley says, this book is about the playwright, the forgotten man of the modern stage. Forgotten? I shall be told that he is far from forgotten, that he occupies a recognized place in an industrial hierarchy. Here we must distinguish between real playwrights and those committees of businessmen and script manufacturers who put together Broadway and Hollywood shows on intellectual assembly lines. It's still happening. In other words, we must distinguish between art and commodity. Art and commerce. This book is concerned with art. But it can be admitted at the outset that the relation of art to commodity is seldom simple, and that, particularly in the theater, art has seldom or never flourished in absolute independence of commodity. Indeed, it is well known that dramatic art has most often had to exist in the commodity theater, or not at all. If by now the public is so specialized in different directions, so stratified and diversified, that independent art theaters are possible and desirable, this is a new and unprecedented situation. Let us postpone the analysis of it until after we have perused the modern stage more thoroughly. And that is the setup for what was a groundbreaking book. And then Eric Bentley lived his life. And then, in 1987, he wrote a whole new book. And this is how Google Books has documented that book. Eric Bentley, blah. And I can't believe they let this stand. This is supposed to be the front of his book. And this is very clearly a scanning error. This is what it looks like when you are scanning a book cover and you take the book cover off the scanner at the wrong time. You get nothing. This is what the book is supposed to look like. Eric Bentley, his photograph, thinking about the playwright. Right? Now his famous book from 1945, The Playwright as Thinker. 1987, he writes, Thinking About the Playwright, which is a reversal. It's very interesting. Comments from 4 decades. Published by Northwestern University Press. Big university, important press. And this is how Google has indexed that book. Now, this is the preface to that follow-up book that he wrote 40 years later. Playwright is not only the subject of this book, but I'm using the title Thinking About the Playwright, not so much because I wrote a book called The Playwright as Thinker long ago, as because the theater has remained for me a playwright-centered universe. Today you buy a ticket to Hamlet or any other classic at your peril, because what you will witness is the author's purpose subverted by the latest pipsqueak to graduate from drama school. There may even be a discussion afterwards in which the graduated director will call the atrocity he has committed a metaphor, or perhaps a concept. When Agamemnon was produced by the New York Shakespeare Festival in the 70s, the program, as I recall, acknowledged, lower down the page, that Aeschylus had written it, but announced at the top that it had been conceived by Mr. Blank Blank Blank, the director. Gone is the modesty of Sam Taylor in the filming of Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare, with additional dialogue by Sam Taylor. Aeschylus may in some sense, be allowed to have delivered the baby, but it had been conceived 9 months earlier on the seacoast of Romania. And that is still going on today, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, where directors believe they are the author of the play. That without them, the play does not exist. Without them, the playwright is powerless and infantilized. And the new push is for directors to now demand a share of the author's royalties. And that was an issue even on the Will Rogers Follies in 1990. Tommy Tune wanted part of the author's royalties, and most of the authors said no. And then some magic was done behind the scenes, and Sam Cohn, the agent, gave up his share to placate the director's request, as I understand it. That was told to me by Peter Stone himself, so if it was wrong, it was wrong. Gordon says he and I are clearly connected because he wrote the word Romania. Very good, Mr. Deredesco. And then here's a really interesting piece of what drives and drove Eric Bentley. When I was about 15, one of our teachers came to class and told us about a play that he'd just seen in London. He couldn't remember the names of the characters, but he would call the leading one Sybil Thorndike because she was the actress who played that role. The plot was absolutely terrific. I think that's the way he put it. The plot was absolutely terrific, and the play ended with Sybil Thorndike's son going mad on stage, with poor Sybil Thorndike unable to make up her mind whether or not to keep her promise, which was to give him poison. At a slightly later date, I came upon a copy of the play Ghosts by Henrik Ibsen in a small branch library of the Lancashire town where I grew up. Looking at the last page of the play, I recognized my teacher's play. A preface said something about the Italian actress who had evidently played Sybil Thorndike. The name was spelled D-U-S-E. I wondered how you pronounced it. Reading through the play, though, I found the schoolmaster had exaggerated neither the circumstances of the story nor the effectiveness. I, too, found the play absolutely terrific. The colloquial hyperbole seems indeed appropriate to the youthful enthusiasm I felt for an author who could stir me so deeply. I don't recall being so surprised by a book, caught off guard, as it were, completely bowled over until the college days I read Crime and Punishment. Or until, also during my college years, I first saw Henrik Ibsen staged. And that, my friend, is the beauty and the power of the live stage. Even when it comes alive from the page. And I used to teach a class at Rutgers University called From Page to Stage. And before I taught that class, it was a literature class where you sat there and you read the plays and you talked about them. And I said, well, we're going to change this because a play is not meant to be read. A play is meant to be performed. And this class, the title of this class is From Page to Stage. So right here in this room, with everything we have with us, we're going to put up scenes from these plays and we're going to stage them. And at first there was a little bit of pushback. Well, how dare you? This is a literature class, an English class. This is not a theater class. And I said, well, it is a theater class. And it's an English class. And it's a literature class. And it's a human life living class because these are the things that we're going to be talking about during the semester. And you're going to make connections between this play and that play and find similar through lines and intentions and things that matter to people. And once we got it up and they started seeing how you could re-visualize something that you read in text and seeing it done live in front of your classmates could change the world. A death scene that you read on the page is very different when you watch the death happening live in front of you in a classroom on Tuesday evening in Newark, New Jersey. And that's how we begin to build appreciation and understanding of things we like and things we may not completely understand. By surrendering. I submit. My teacher's excited about this. I guess I'll be excited too. Oh, now wait a minute. Now I understand the excitement. And that was the beauty of Eric Bentley. He got excited. He did his own investigations. And then he wrote about it, and he made connections and things that he loved and appreciated and promised, like Ibsen and Strindberg and Brecht. He brought them forward and said, these people are important. And before anything else, Eric Bentley was a genius and a scholar. And he knew how to touch people and to read their minds to know what they did not know and what they needed to know. And in that intimacy of one mind trusting another, well, you could go here or you could go there. There's danger here and reward there, but it could be the other way around. It all depends on how you view it and what experience you want to take home with you. And what experience you want to have for other people. And so the playwright, as thinker, has a large responsibility to try to invent ideas and items that have resonance in people. And sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not successful. And you want to jump from your seat and you want to reach out and make a difference. And there was a play at one time called Waiting for Lefty. And it was a play about coming together as a union. And that play was staged, and it created a riot in the audience. Because people in the audience stood up and cheered and went out into the streets and rioted. Now that's the power of the theater. But we are also defined by context and time and place. And when I was at Columbia, there was a young director trying to make a name for himself who said, hey, I'm going to do Waiting for Lefty. And I'm going to stage it. And maybe we're going to have a riot and see what happens. Now, as a historical piece, it was interesting to see Waiting for Lefty, and it was very outdated. Not terribly interesting, because a lot of the concerns of the play had already been solved by unionization and immigration. And then there was a strange director's choice where this director decided to have plants, bakery in the audience, and have people stand up. Waiting for Lefty, waiting for Lefty. Pretending to be upset by the play, modified by the got up and left the theater, suggesting a riot in the street. That did not work. I think the attempt was misbegotten because you're trying to force something to happen that naturally happened in the 1930s when the play was written, that was not going to happen in 1991 at 125th Street in Broadway. So do we honor the attempt, or do we say, oh, that was just wrong from the beginning? redoing the play and seeing what could happen is good, but then trying to fake a rebellion in the audience to recreate what happened naturally in 1930 is a complete and total disaster because it's inauthentic and it's fake. And if there's one thing that Eric Bentley taught us is that the modern stage needs to be relative and reflexive, and not just reflective, and not ever imitative. And that is his legacy, and not many people know that that is the Eric Bentley legacy. To think, to feel, to survive, to learn, to lean, and to make good on your life. And that's the lesson that many of us hope to learn and yet never find out. And on that note, we say goodbye, Eric Bentley. We loved your life. We love your work. And we're glad we finally have the opportunity to say